Good afternoon. Call a meeting of the Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee to order. Today's December 12th. It's noon, 12:03 actually, 12:04. And we're about to get started with the business. If there's no objection, I believe we've been asked to take up briefly the AWWU report that would be in other business first. So if there's no objection, that's what we'll do, and then we'll dive into the portion. So, hearing no objection, Mr. Corstino, Mr. Falsey.
Yes, thanks. We wanted to give you an update on what may well be our very first infrastructure coordination agreement, which is a new device that we created in the AWU tariff to help unlock some of these projects that have been stuck because we need to build bigger lines. I'm going to let Mark Dusheimer and General Manager Corstino take it over. Are we trying to find the presentation here? Do you want me to put it on? If we can, we're going to race to find the presentation, and we'll be ready. Sure.
Let's not wait.
Okay, you all have hard copies, so if you don't want to wait, we'll go ahead and start. So the second slide is, the first slide is yes, it's an informational presentation only to give you an update on what we've done to get an infrastructure coordination agreement in place, which is our first one, which is exciting. It's a good news. And this just got under tariff in 2017. It allows us flexibility in working with development community to extend water mains. So a little bit, the specific area we're talking about is Sand Lake area. It's West Anchorage. In 2004, it's an area that's been plagued with arsenic in private wells. So there's a problem. It's a public health issue. 2004, there was a study that looked at it. In 2006, we did a follow-up study with respect to water and sewer to investigate it too, to look at options. There was a lot of public involvement and feedback and looking at plans. And as a result of that study, in 2009, the state gave us some grant money to extend backbone water and sewer infrastructure to some of these underserved areas.
Can I interrupt you, Mark?
Yes.
Mr. Constance, okay. Is there a map or something of
There
what
is.
area specifically we're talking about?
Yeah, so, okay, we'll skip ahead. It's the third or fourth. It's right here.
Okay.
And then actually the next slide is as well. It goes into the very specific detail we're looking at. This is a good overall map of the whole West Anchorage area. As the color shows, a lot of the red areas do not have water and sewer. And so this is specifically to water. We're only talking water. It does also involve sewer to some degree. The ICA is only water sewer. We're stick to one utility, which is water, but it does, the overall study looked at water and sewer as a whole.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Constance.
Okay, so like I said, in 2009 there was grant money to set. There was only a limited amount of grant money, so we used it to get as maximum benefit we could in the entire area for future growth and expansion. So we did install backbone water and sewer. Some folks hooked up, but not a lot because there was only so much we could do with the amount of money. We were really trying to set the backbone for future expansion. In 2012, there was also the MOA did the West Anchorage District Plan, and two of the utility objectives, as noted, were provide and plan infrastructure to address current and future needs for infrastructure, including water and sewer, and specifically an objective 4 to ensure a safe and reliable public drinking water supply. And then in 2012, we did our water master plan, and again, we did public involvement, and it confirmed some of these projects that we've done and we will potentially do in the future that's needed for the area. Now moving on to the specific project at hand, which is what is part of the 2012 master plan. That some of these maps are part of that. We did identify specific projects that water mains and sewer mains that we do that the community could use there in future growth if the opportunities present themselves. One of them that we're doing now through an infrastructure coordination agreement is the Seafloor portion, which is a small residential street. There's a private developer who's going to be developing some lots out there on the corner of Sand Lake and I think 80th, or in that general area anyway. But they don't have even water to that lot. So we're going to extend the water main to the lot. They're going to pay a portion of that through an infrastructure coordination agreement, and they'll also be, so it'll last for a lot of future customers. The 40-some lots that the developer's going to develop, and it also will go by 40-plus lots who have people that right now are in private wells that may have arsenic problems that could connect to it if they choose to in the future. Right.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are some homes developed there now, but some that are not.
Good question. So going back to this map, the private developer, there's a big vacant lot here, right above the circle.
Okay, yeah.
We're almost there.
Yeah. That lot is being developed by a private developer,
Okay.
but there's not even water in that lot yet. So the developer. Okay, let's go to the. Oops. Yes. All right. This lot is being developed right now.
Uh-huh.
There's no water main to that lot right now. So we are going to, through an infrastructure coordination agreement, we are going to run a water main to this lot. The developer will pay us back their fair share, and then the rest of the people, if they decide to connect, will pay their portion through a levy upon connection. So that's how this will work.
Got it. Can I
I'll
ask
keep
a
it simple.
follow-up
Yes.
question? Thank you, Mr. Constant. How is this related or completely different from the folks who tried to connect last assembly meeting?
Yeah.
It's a different place.
I told you
but
that
also-
question would come up. No, it's a good question. So it will invoke, I'm going to go to the last slide. Then. So what this will do is they don't have to connect. If they choose to connect, this will go through the House Bill 380 process, which is the levy upon connection. When water mains are run down streets through existing infrastructure, there's vacant lots that have never been connected, there's a levy imposed upon that property. So if they connect, they have to pay for that connection and run service. So that's what I'm going to say on that specific issue that happened at the last assembly meeting. We're giving a presentation. That's a big comprehensive issue, how we do extensions and
But were they in a different area?
That's
unrelated to this.
It is unrelated.
Yeah, okay, similar process, unrelated, got it.
Correct.
But not 50 years old.
Right.
Correct. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so where did I lose yet? Okay, so bottom line, this last slide then is the specific project we're going to do. Over to the next slide. Is really running, this is the back room that was built through grant money back in 2009, 2010. We're going to build a water main through the street so we can get as many houses as possible through this one water main. And we'll serve that lot as well. So that we'll get full payback on that lot. These folks, if they choose to connect at a later date, will get levied and they'll pay for connection at the time if they choose to do so. With that, I want to keep it short and sweet. Oh, final slide is there is some action on the assembly down the road. So the advantage of the ICA honestly is neat. Developers work very, very fast. This proposal came to us about a month ago, and we've got a working agreement in place. What will happen later is because it gets back to that kind of levy type issue, there will be a levy upon connection which requires a House Bill 380 process, and they don't have to hook up. They don't have to at all. We'll go through during the project and ask folks if they want a connection to their house and a future connection, so that if they get a levy, it would be levied upon the connection. Well, that whole process, let's say that for, I think January 10th, we've got a whole meeting on that specific topic and how that works. It's an interesting one, but we'll get through that one. And because it'll involve construction to build that water main, you'll be a construction contractor, because the main's going to get built this summer. The developer wants to be done next fall. And so this is going to act fast. And you'll see a construction contract, it'll put out for bid, and it'll be before the assembly is ready.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Welton, Ms. Kennedy, and then Mr. Peterson.
So the neighborhood you're going to run that pipe through, those are fairly small lots, are those 6,000 square feet or 7, 8?
They're small, you're right. So they don't meet code right now. So one of the areas in the WAD, West End District Plan, is 40,000 square feet for well and septic. These are nowhere near that. Right? So they're all well and septic, but they don't meet current standards.
So you kind of want to get them all hooked up because of that. What would it cost them to hook up?
So all that will come later. We have
Is
so
it
cost.
10,000 or 50?
Well, okay, a couple things. If they choose, during this process, we build a main last, and if they want to step out to the property. So at that point, they may do a levy upon connection. They'd start to run the main from the property line to the house too. So I'm not going to give you an estimate without knowing the real answer, but it's thousands of dollars.
If they could wait 2 years and then they don't have to pay their percentage.
No, not in this case. That's why that January 10th meeting is important, because we're going to go through all these different processes that occur. We have a whole tariff, which is a big book, and we have to follow. There's a lot of rules. I want to synchronize it down for it so it's easy to understand and comprehend. But no, the big advantage about a levy, though, that's really important to understand is the overall cost may be in the thousands of dollars, but they can pay that back over a long period of time. There's no interest charges, so there's worth the benefit. So it just goes under the monthly bill, I believe. But we're flushing that process out so we can make sure it's discernible for everyone to understand, because it is complicated. It always has been.
And as we have seen,
Yes.
if they didn't pay now, they might pay in 50 years. So it's not like 2 years from now is a big difference, I think. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Weddleton got a couple of my questions already, but the connections itself from the line to the home, is that something AWWU will do simultaneously or private
will.
contractors actually make that actual connection, or
We-
how does that work?
So before we do final design and construction, we will ask the homeowners if they're interested. If they work out an agreement, we will put a connect stub out to the property line as part of our project. If they don't want it, then they don't get a stub out. And if they do want it in the future, they can still do it, but now they have to build the entire service from their house all the way to the main instead of just the property line.
Okay, but is it still an individual or a private contractor that makes that final connection to the house?
On property, yes.
Okay.
All the property work is done by
Okay.
the
Thank you.
homeowner.
Peterson? So we just have 5 minutes left for this before we have to pivot.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is the water line running underneath the street, or are we creating a utility corridor between lots, or how?
No, it'll be under the street. Yes. So it'll be yes, we'll tear up the street. It'll be a disruption to the neighborhood, but we will do public involvement, let them know what's going on, and we will act as fast as we can.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So you said really fast something about arsenic and just kept going. So there's problems with these wells? Is that what I was?
Yeah, so and we don't, I think onsite, MOA onsite takes care of onsite water and wastewater issues, but what is the second slide shows, there's a lot of studies that have been done in this area that show, yes, arsenic, which is a poison at certain levels, is there's a lot of these wells that have arsenic. Now they can do, so there's been a lot of studies related to that starting in 2004, and they can do on-site treatment themselves, but the reality is some people prefer not to have that in there at all.
I can describe some of that in a minute.
And I have one quick follow-up if I may, Mr.
Please.
Chair. Is there anything, we stub out to the property line if the property owner wants it. Has there ever been a consideration of stubbing out to the property line as part of the main, putting the water main in to encourage folks to possibly, or to kind of look down the road so it's not quite so onerous if that property changes hands in the future?
Two things on that. If it's outside funded, we can certainly do that. In other words, if you're not using utility reps, we're constrained with how we spend our money. Our rate base has to go back to our rate customers, right? So if there's outside funding and that's a desire, that can happen. The risk we've run into that, we have done it in the past. As a matter of fact, I used to live in West Anchorage, and a lot of the services were undersized, and so they have to rip them out and replace them anyways. If they don't connect it for 20 years, it may be too old, too far gone. So really, you want to do it at the time if you can.
Mr. President.
Just a quick question. You may have already said this. How are we paying for it?
It'll be we're forward funding it, but we're basically essentially giving out a loan that the private developer has to pay back, and then these folks, if they connect, we pay it back to the dwelling connection.
And that covers the entire cost?
It does.
Thanks.
All right, and so there's no current action, right? This will come before us at some point. So it's worth for me to make a disclosure at this time. I have my real estate license on reverse status, and I may or may not at the end of this month decide to renew that, which is not an active status. I haven't had a transaction in a year, but my brokerage is Dwell. Dwell is Connie Oshimura. Connie Oshimura is the property developer at the top of this map. And so at this time, there's no action and really no conflict for me, but I'll let you know should that continue as we come closer to the question. So, all right. Any other comments before we let these guys go?
Oh, last slide. The only final comment I have is this. We had our director's breakfast this morning, so I've been up early cooking eggs and bacon and stuff. So happy holidays.
And I would just note, Ms. Zaltel, that area is very interesting. If you look at the well testing reports for all over, there are some very hot spots for arsenic and some that are just cool and some that are clean. And so every property owner who buys in on the well really needs to check their COSA very closely, because if you have children, you really want to get that water filtered. So it's of high public health value to get water service there. All right, so next we're going to switch topics to value engineering, PCT. Mr. Falsey, you want to lead the way?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Constant. I don't know what level of detail you are interested in, so I have over-prepared. If we start to cross our eyes, let me know. But we have been engaged in a value engineering or cost reduction exercise as a result of assembly direction back in July 30th as part of the first phase of the floating cement mill procurement. I'll say this is a presentation I put together. Jason has seen it. There are 5 members of the Value Engineering or Cost Reduction Group. They are myself, Jason Bockenstead, Roaster, Julie Speed, Ryan Zinn, who's in the audience, and Lev in full speed. So it may well be that we have different views. I don't know, but don't take my word as gospel. It's a 5-person crew, and we'll figure it all out together. But let me tell you the quick tour of what we have been up to. So after you passed that resolution on July 30th, we got together and met with a whole bevy of people on August 7th. And since August 7th, we have met this many times for at least 2 hours, and I think we would all say every minute has been a joy. So what have we actually been doing? I'll try to present it in a way that will seem like it was much more systematic and thoughtful than it probably really was in real time, but here's what we've been up to. Remind where we are.
Go back just a minute.
Yes.
Keep your head out of my way. Thank you.
The first meetings, we invited everyone, and lots of people showed up.
Okay.
Other people couldn't handle the level of joy that was going on in the room, and then it ultimately boiled down to the 5 of us and staff.
Chris and I can line you up with some people who
Make it more interesting.
Okay, so we're picking up the petroleum cement terminal, which we had just awarded the first phase of. 2020 work is the trestle that leads out to the platform. The follow-on work is the 2021 scope of work, all of the dolphins that you tie up to on the sides, all the stuff that goes on top of the platform or that hangs off of the platform. And the question was, is there anything we can do to reduce costs in either of those 2 seasons? So we broke it kind of into the 2 seasons by fits and starts, and for 2020, I think this is what we ended up arraying. Was there a way to change the size of the platform, make it smaller? Should we reduce the trestle width, because remember it gotten a little larger to accommodate DPI's new equipment? Should we change the dredge depth? Should we switch to foreign steel instead of domestic steel? We had the Pacific Pile Marine guys come and say, hey, one of your insurance requirements looks like it's requiring me to buy more insurance than you would ever reasonably need, so we took a look at that. And then because the group was charged with finding cost reductions, naturally we found a way to add costs. And there was a lot of discussion on whether we should add a gangway, which is a piece of metal that's sort of like a ramp that's on the platform, and you attach it to the boat, and as the boat goes up and down, you got a ramp to get on and off. Right now, the way the petroleum cement terminal works, you put people on and off the ship by putting them in man baskets or the cherry picker. So with those kind of arrayed, spent a lot of time staring at maps that look like this. We're saying, here's the real estate on the platform. Is there anything that we can move or shrink to change the size of the platform? And the punchline is, by some combination of, we thought it was a good idea to have this size of platform, or a good idea to have this size trestle, or we were just out of time to make these changes because they had to start casting molds. Most all of this, we did not find anything to change. The one thing that we did change was we agreed when we had risk look at the insurance requirement, we were requiring the contractor to acquire more insurance coverage than we thought reasonably necessary, so we found $72,000 of cost reductions there. And equal time, if you guys want to ask Brian or anybody else what their view of this was. The punchline for 2020 was we didn't find a lot of cost reductions or anything beyond $72,000 for the current contract. And then we left ourselves a homework assignment. The gangway doesn't really change anything in the 2020 geometry, or really in the 2021 geometry, and it's more equipment than construction work. So we're studying it and deciding what we think about it, but it's $100,000.
Mr. Dyson?
Does changing to foreign steel affect federal contribution?
Yes, it would have. And so we got a quote from the Pacific Pile Marine. He would credit us back to switch to foreign steel in some amount, which was, I don't know if I have a secret now, but maybe $1 million. But that would have really messed up our build rate, which ended up being 25. Okay, so then after pivoting away from 2020, we looked at 2021, and eventually this sort of became our lodestone, our guidance. So we said, what is the 2021 work? Well, it's this $80 million that we've been talking about, and our best estimates now are it breaks down like this. The dolphins and the line share, those are those things that are out on the sides that you tie your ship to, the catwalks that connect them, the fendering system that the ships can bump into without destroying the platform, The operations building, where the folks who really manage the ship operations and the fueling operations live. The hose tower, remember, because we have these huge tides, you have to have a lot of extra hose to follow the ship as it goes up and down 27 feet, and you can't pinch the hose against the boat and the platform edge. You got to have some way of lifting or at least moving the hoses to keep it at the right length. And then the fuel piping. We didn't spend a lot of time on site work because that was just utility stuff that we made a lot of decisions to make. So then we picked up all of those one by one and interrogated them to see what kind of changes we can make. So I'll give you the penny tour of that. For the dolphins, we spent a lot of time staring at this graph. And this graph shows in color-coded detail, and I'll zoom in for you, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dolphins. And we said, if you wanted to make these currently designed, seismically resilient, monopile dolphins cheaper and defensively cheaper, what would you have to do? And we ultimately said, let's take a look at all of them. What is causing them to have the configuration they have right now? And it's different for each of them, but with similar considerations. For this breasting dolphin number 1 in blue, there's a breasting dolphin number 3 in blue on the right-hand side, ice crushing controls. So if you assume there's some amount of crushing force that the inlet ice is going to push up against the steel, you got to make the steel rigid enough for ice crushing. If you said, never mind, I don't think the ice is coming anymore, it doesn't happen, we use the wrong number, there's climate change, the next thing that would control is the seismic criteria. You said, never mind, I don't care if it's as seismically resilient as it was. The next thing is burden, like how hard the vessels might bang into it. And so in the main, we said if you were going to change these dolphins to have less steel or less cost, you probably have to pick up and interrogate all of those factors. Is there a way to make different assumptions, say, has less berthing velocities smashing against it, different ice crushing forces, and different seismic criteria? And we picked up and looked at all the dolphins, and they're controlled by different things. So ice was the first one over there. Seismic is the breasting dolphin number 2. For the mooring dolphins in the back, it was ice crushing. And for the mooring dolphins in the middle in the back, it was seismic. So we had heard from the assembly that we were not really going to deviate from our seismic decisions, which are strenuous. And they say, if we have a operating level earthquake, a contingent level earthquake, or a super big design level earthquake, we want to be up and running in 7 to 10 days, because otherwise we're going to be an island in the state of Alaska. That is more than the minimum requirement. The minimum requirement of the code of the engineering, pick the book off the shelf, says if you had the design level earthquake, you could make sure it doesn't kill anybody when it falls down, but you can take a year or more to replace it, right? We didn't change those seismic assumptions, but we did give ourselves a homework assignment. We said there's so much acute interest in this, we should figure out what would the dolphins have looked like if you had designed them to a lesser seismic standard so that we can estimate what that seismic premium really was. So that was the action item that came out of the dolphins. It then said,
We have a quick question.
Yeah.
I think myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any parameters from the federal grant money we've taken that really kind of overlay this entire analysis? Do they have any, did the build grant have any design specifications?
no, I think the answer to that is
Okay,
no.
because I know at one point there were talk about funds that we had to.
There was one that we applied for sea level rise, and so if we said, never mind, we're going to drop the whole thing, that would have probably disqualified us. And this foreign steel versus American steel, Sharon's going to give us the real answer.
Sharon Wells, Deputy Director. They would have, I think you're thinking of the pre-disaster mitigation grant that we applied for that was specifically seismic resiliency, up to $10 million for seismically resilient features. And we did apply for it, but we weren't selected for that one.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so that was our seismic interrogation, and then we said, remember, if you see it's going to get meaningfully different, we might end up having to do ice, seismic, and berthing velocities. So we said, where did all of our berthing velocities come from? A lot of discussion about that. It's a combination of what ships do you assume are coming in, how heavy are they, or how much mass do they have, rather, and what velocities are they banging into you with. We have some speed limits in our tariff, but these are not speed limits. These are like the crash rail limits. Like, regardless of if you have to drive 55, what is the guardrail that's on the side of the cliff have to actually bounce the cars back over? And we went around the globe and found, so far as we can tell, there was, oh man, I forget the acronyms. There was an acronym for the berthing velocity standard we're supposed to use. And we chased to find, is there any other standard we could use? It looked like there was a MOTEM. I think it was MOTEM was a different standard, but it all kind of collapsed in the same place. And after interrogating it, just like the berthing velocities are the berthing velocities. There's not a defensible way to say, never mind, we'll pick a different standard to assume that the forces have to be able to resist. Okay, so that left ice criteria. We spent some time on ice criteria. The two things to know about ice criteria, because I want you to have the same level of joy that I've had, is that there's compressive ice strength, how much the ice flow is just pushing into stuff, and the flexual strength. For compressive strength, we have in our performance material design 250 pounds per square inch. So at some point, the ice is going to push that hard into these monopiles. There is a little bit of art to that in addition to science, because we don't have great data, but we have some data. But we compared it to where our numbers came from, where everybody else's were. So the seismic manual had suggested 300, API had suggested 300. Petroleum oil lubricant terminal 2 is rated for 200, but no one can figure out where they got that number from. But ultimately, we sort of were satisfied that the compressive ice strength criteria number that we landed on was defensible. But there was still a lot of interest in flexual strength. So if you don't have a flat thing, but you have a bent thing, and the ice kind of bends up into it like that, what do you need for there? Our manual has had this 100 PSI. PND did a study for the Knik arm crossing in which they said the right number to use is much less than that, 25 to 50. That doesn't matter at all if you're using monopiles, but it got a lot of discussion because it would matter if you were using batter piles. So having looked at the monopile 9 dolphins that we have currently described, we said we're going to give ourselves a homework assignment on seismic. We don't think there's anything to change on berthing velocities, and we're comfortable with our ice criteria. But we did spend a lot of time talking about batter piles, and so I'll give you a quick tour of that too. We had spent, before all of this exercise, some effort in figuring out whether we wanted batter piles or monopiles. And we picked monopiles for 2 reasons. They were, compare the monopiles to the batter piles, and here they are. So monopile, giant, single piece of steel tubing, batter pile, a kind of TP of steel tubing. We picked the monopiles because they take a lot less time to install, so that's the smaller number on the bottom, and were therefore cheaper, and because of the permitting risk. When you do this, you have to install them with certain kind of vibratory hammers or with impact hammers. That causes sound. The sound can bother the beluga whales. The single biggest construction risk at this point is beluga whale harassment, and we have to get that permit in hand. We measure the sort of risk exposure in this novel unit, acre hours, which I feel like if kilogram meters per second squared is a Newton and kilogram meters squared per second squared is a joule, this should be a beluga. But we picked the monopiles
Bill
because
was a physics major.
we picked monopiles because they were cheaper and because you can install monopiles with the impact hammer. And this is what you've heard about. There aren't a lot of these in the world that are big enough to do this. But they create sounds when attenuated or not attenuated, only go about that far away. So that's where we're going to be looking for whales. And if too many whales come in, then we go, shut it down. But if you want to do batter piles, as I understand it, you cannot use the impact hammer. You have to use the vibratory hammer. And the vibratory hammer makes way bigger sounds. And so we're not even confident that you could get these permitted, which felt to us pretty outcome determinative. But there's not a lot to be gained by talking a lot about batter piles because I'm not sure you can get a permit and they seem to be more expensive. But there was in the conversation a thread that because there are very few of these impact hammers which are giant enough to install the monopiles that we want, maybe it is the case that the cost is going to be really expensive because somehow we won't get competitive pricing. And in the meantime, anybody can do batter piles. Local people could do batter piles, and so there could be some cost savings. And if we had the wrong flexual ice assumptions, maybe the batter piles could be really skinny even. So it would be skinny, super cheap, and if you make the extraordinary assumption that we could get them permitted, maybe a better way to go. I'm not convinced of that, but we have agreed to sort of further study that as part of that change order that we talked about last time, where we're going to kind of run the batter pile against the monopile and see the different assumptions, what the cost changes really are.
Before you go on, Mr. Weddleton and then Mr. Vice.
I thought there was some kind of piles you could screw in.
Yeah, so that came up a couple weeks ago. There are a kind of piles that you can screw in, but as I understand it, and I'll look to Jeff, when we looked at it, they're too small, and you have to drive piles into the ground as a template to screw them. So what's the right?
Jacobs Engineering. So right now, the biggest helical pile, it's called, right now, we think the 22-inch pile is the biggest one that's, you've got a driving mechanism to screw it in. Going to 4-foot diameter, that technology currently doesn't exist.
Well, 4 foot if you're doing monopile, but what if you're doing batter piles? They're not going to be
Yeah, well, we looked at for the production piles, I'm sorry, just the straight driven 48-inch diameter piles that are in the 2020 scope of work. But the batter piles, dolphins, I don't know if you can screw them in at an angle. I think they're more of a vertical application. So from a size limitation alone, we didn't pursue that.
How big are the batter piles?
48-inch.
Oh, those are how big? The batter piles.
So we've got right now the design is a 12-foot diameter monopile, and we're comparing that to an array of batter piles, which are 8 piles driven out at an angle, but they're 48-inch diameter. We talk about, can we get them down to 36-inch diameter, we might be able to make that work. We increase the wall thickness or something like that. We're looking at that, but we're still a long ways from 22 inches, which the technology is limited at.
All right, Mr. Iser.
Yeah, forgive me for being slow. When you're talking about the dump velocity component, that's the rate that the ship is moving, or it impacts the.
Yes, this MOTEM standard, which I'm not remembering, PNIC, there's 2 standards, MOTEM and PNIC, which ultimately ended up being the same thing. But yes, they say if you are in one of 5 alpha rated categories, you should assume the velocities are in this range, and then take your ships that have that mass, apply it to that, and then build it for that kinetic energy. So yes, it is a metric of how much kinetic impact we're going to get.
The ship is moving sideways. It gets if the numbers on crushing and bending strength and cooking are very good. They've involved in research to produce very comparable numbers. Yeah, so these guys don't hurt me, but tidal velocity in the dock phase is 6-7 knots sometimes. Here 4 years ago, a German ship coming in, an air start engine, just about ran out of air, and so on. But the tide would not take a boat very fast sideways, All right.
Yeah.
I'm satisfied. Thank you.
We have your plan for the ship strike, which has, if you don't want another YouTube rabbit hole to go down, you can Google ship strikes and see some pretty catastrophic dock damage when boats bang into the dock. So that was our dolphin exercise. We spent basically no time on catwalks because catwalks are just steel structures, metal structures that connect the dolphins. So there wasn't really a lot of decisions to be made there. There's no plating for them for any particular reason. No one had any good ideas to address catwalks. So moving down the list, the next was fenders. And our fender system is different. So if you've been on the water and you look at the yellow panels, and you can kind of imagine looking right at the yellow panel. The yellow panels we have now are on pin piles. So we have driven something into the seabed, and then our fender is sort of straddling it. That has been difficult to maintain. And at Nikiski, the private marathon dock has used a different fendering system where the fender is attached to some of the piles that are a part of the superstructure, and it sort of you bang into it and it flexes and it's on the pivot or something. So we did that. This is the system that we adopted. This is the side angle now on this end. You kind of see where it might pivot in. There was some question about whether we should go back to pin piles. We had people go do a site visit at Nikiski. Ultimately, everybody seemed to be satisfied that this was a better solution. So I don't think
And less expensive.
And less expensive solution. So no one came up with a better idea for fenders. It's a weird slide. So it won't let me go forward. So I'm going to jump out. Do that correctly. Come right back. Okay. So having done fenders, now we're to the operations building. And this may be the first place where the value engineering 5 may come to an impasse and an actual disagreement. We'll see. All right, so what is the operations building? It is this 2-story glorified shack, which on the bottom is mostly empty, and on the top is space for 4 desks. And the people who live there are the NRC contractors who actually manage ship operations and the fueling operations. And we brought the architect in and we said, what can we do on this thing to make it cheaper? Can we make it smaller? Can we make it defensively crappier? And there are a couple suggestions that came out of that conversation. One was, it's finished with drywall right now. And we could instead use like lower grade construction plywood or whatever it's called. Okay. So there's a couple thousand bucks there, maybe. Fine, we'll do that. Another was, one of the participants of the group said, hey, what's up with this stairwell having a roof? Why don't you get rid of that roof? To which the poor guys are like, that's crazy. You put roofs on all the stairs, one slip and fall is going to completely eat any of the savings that you had. But we had an actual vote at a moment when there were only 4 of us in the room, and I think it came down to 2 wanted to take the roof off, and 2 abstained because we wanted better information about how much we were actually even going to save here. I think ultimately I don't want to do that. I don't know where the group is ultimately going to land, but there would be some thousands of dollars of savings if you got rid of that roof, and it's still on the to-do list. We're looking at it. The other thing on the operations that we are more seriously looking at too is that the roof is now designed to accommodate people walking on it. And that was because there's some equipment on there that you would need to service from time to time. You could make the roof cheaper if you didn't have like pavers on the top and you just had like a weather barrier. If you completely went to just the weather barrier, apparently those get ripped up all the time. It's a maintenance problem and it's not a huge amount of saving. There may be a middle ground that we're going to land on, I don't know, where we make part of the roof walkable, or we move all the equipment that you need to service closer to the ladder. But you can feel the joy that we have obviously been having with these meetings as we've been diving into those issues. This is still on our to-do list. There might be something that we do with the operations. On the operations line for the previous spreadsheet, we have also included some of the accoutrements that are on the platform, and those include what you tie the ropes to that are holding the ships. Right now, we have these dumb bollards, which are literally just metal posts. And the current design is that we have these smart hooks, these quick release stuff, and they are more expensive than just having metal posts. So we spent a lot of time saying, is that worth it? And the consensus of the group seems to be yes. This is one where we could do it cheaper, but one incident would completely eliminate those savings, and we have had lines break, and this is the safety standard, and no one's doing dumb hooks anymore, so we're probably going to stick there. All right, so that's the operations tower. Maybe deleting a roof, maybe changing a roof over stairs, maybe changing the roof. And no drywall.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Just a quick question about,
Kennedy.
thank you. Why is it the stairwell has to be an exterior one? I mean, your lower level is an interior, so part of that stairs could be underneath the lower level, but was it just a greater cost for having interior?
I think the answer is if the stair was inside, you either would eat into usable space on the second floor, or you'd have to make the whole second floor bigger, which costs more, and you heat all that. It's a pretty simple wraparound access to the stairs. I don't know. But we asked the architect, can you do it any cheaper? We didn't suggest any interior stair.
Right, thank you.
I should also say before completely leaving that, we also spent a lot of time talking about whether the operations building could be located somewhere else, or whether you could do all of that work with cameras. And we invited the folks who actually live in that operations building, and they were like, no way, no how. That's a real safety disaster, so I think we can send that one to bed too. Okay, hose towers. We talked about the hose tower has to manage all of the extra hose you need to accommodate the tides. This too was studied before all of this effort, and the big choice was do we want a hose tower or marine loading arms. And so here's our current hose tower, which you can see in the middle of it is just a pulley system that winches up the hose and drops it back down as needed. And then there's the man basket crane that's on top. And there was an alternative idea, which is that you can get rid of this host tower and you have these robot arms. And the conclusion that we came to internally were robot arms are cooler, but they're more expensive and we don't need them. The ultimate design that we ended up with was not quite exactly what we have, but pretty close to what we have, with a slightly better arm on top. And I don't have all the details on that yet, because this is what's our most unfinished business and is in our next meeting. But this is what we ended up with, and like I say, we're going to interrogate how important it was to have this supersized or better arm than we have now. There was also initially, before all of this effort, a question about whether we just pick up our current host tower and move it, and that was the original plan. But as we looked at it, it looked like it was not sort of worthy of doing that. That we might break it, taking it apart. And of course, if we do that, we actually take that other terminal out of service. So the choice was to go with something very close to what we have and build it new. We have had a lot of questions about what exactly this costs. And it was going to just be a requirement of the contractor go buy us one, but now we're going to really design it so that we know exactly what it costs and we know what our trade-offs really are going to be. All right, rounding the corner and heading for home, fuel piping. And here, I saved the best for us. So, we took a look at what we were designing for the petroleum cement terminals, petroleum transfer piping. And now you're looking down on top of it. You can see lines coming in and going over to the hose tower. And the punchline is there are 6 lines here. And as I mentioned before, we had a long presentation where we were evaluating that, and we said, okay, what do we have now? So here's petroleum oil lubricant terminal number 1, and it has 4 lines, and they are 2 distillate lines and 2 aromatic lines. And then we have petroleum oil lubricant terminal number 2, and it has 5 lines, and it's 2 distillates, 1 aromatic, 1 methanol, and 1 ultra-low sulfur diesel. And what are we planning to build? And it is the new petroleum cement terminal, which has 6 lines, 2 distillates, 2 aromatics, 1 methanol, 1 ultra-low sulfur diesel. And at some point in the conversation, we said, hey, those 2 aromatic lines that are over on petroleum oil lubricant terminal number 1, those that hold gasoline and gasoline. Has anybody ever used both of those at the same time? And the answer was yes, very rarely, and you don't need to use them at the same time. You can do it more slowly. So somebody made the motion, what if we just delete that extra line and drop it to 5 and 1? And I think we're arriving at consensus on that. And that's some number of millions of dollars in savings. I don't have a perfect number, but probably in the order of 2. So we found some. That's it.
Mr. Geis?
Sorry. I thought a lot of jet fuel crosses our dock, is that wrong?
That is correct. Which one is distillate?
It's a distillate.
Oh, they call it distillate.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And the distillates, we were told that some of the vessels have to plug in 2 at a time, or they will literally hit the bottom of the sea. So that we couldn't do because they have to offload that quickly. Okay, so that's going to be maybe the success story of this whole effort. And that's the punchline. So other things, though, we've heard, we've wandered off topic from time to time and looked beyond just the petroleum cement terminal. And one of them was, I think there is acute interest in the user group and in the administration in whether we really need another petroleum terminal as part of this overall program. If after we finish the petroleum cement terminals, we need a PT as well. And the suggestion that came from the user group, which was one that was sort of new to us, was what about fuel vaults? So fuel vaults like utilidors. You can imagine the platform of a cargo terminal. You'd have a hatch, and you'd open up the hatch, and there'd be hose, what do they call headers? Headers in the hatch, and you just put your hose in. And so when you're not needing to offload fuel, it's a normal looking cargo dock. When you are offloading petroleum, you got all the facilities there. We had a lot of conversation about that. We ultimately landed on that the fuel vault itself is probably not the right solution for a whole variety of like operational reasons and because of our experiences that we learned about in other locations, but that finding a way to accommodate petroleum deliveries on the cargo dock does seem like it is highly worthy of consideration, and it could potentially avoid the need for an additional petroleum terminal altogether. So I think we haven't sort of made that motion, it might sort of be beyond our charter, but I think we're going to tell you that our preference is to figure out a way to avoid having a petroleum terminal. And when you look at the overall design program that we inherited, the modernization program, deleting the whole PT out in favor of putting a movable hose tower that can get out of the way on the cargo side, that's real money. That's hundreds of millions of dollars. Coming traction there. All right, so what are we doing now? We're having another meeting to talk about the hose tower. We've still got our homework assignments, and then we had COE's change order come before the body, and we told you that was a lot of work that was coming out of this, in addition to the work that they had to do just to get us ready for the construction period in 2020. And they're doing that. One of the other things I didn't mention, in addition to adding a gangway, there was a motion to add rescue ladders onto the piles. If you actually fall into the water, you climb your way back up. Those haven't been in the program because our best understanding is that the ice will tear the ladders off, so they're not really going to be useful. But still, there is interest in it, so we're having COE look at it. We're having the ops building looked at for removing that sheetrock, changing the roof, changing the exterior. We're doing all that work I mentioned on monopiles versus batter piles, and figuring out other kind of flavors of changes that you might make to the monopiles that might be cost reductive. The biggie, eliminating the aromatic fuel line, and then bringing the hose tower to final conclusion. And Ryan was so overjoyed with my presentation, he left, which I think means that I'm out, and I think it's going to.
So I have a couple, and you queued up the next conversation really well. What is your mandate? And the first one raises the question, if we did unify, eliminate one of the petroleum terminals, and we're able to do that on one of the cargo terminals, and then we were able to convince and cajole the shippers to figure out a way to use the docks on separate days instead of all at the same time, that could eliminate two terminals, right?
Potentially.
We could then be really into the saving money.
Yes.
Okay. And has Tote at all this week presented their concept to you, their new ideas?
No, I think we have some guesses of what they are going to be, but Tote and Mattson have both hired engineers of their own, and we have had some homework assignments because we had to figure out fuel vaults and a few other things. They wanted to do some homework, and we are planning for early 2020 getting back to the room and saying, hey, blank sheet of paper, let's figure out what we really want to do here. If I'm guessing correctly at what Toad's idea is going to be, I think it will be in the main well received, but no, I haven't received it.
Because I understand it's complete and they're doing their final review before sharing, so stay tuned. And so before we switch to the next topic, which is what are the next steps, which I'll frame up in a minute, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you. What's the kind of drop dead date for making changes to the PCT? At what point are we just kind of done with this exercise and we have what we've designed and what we've accepted?
Well, since I'm the only one here now, I think we will come to final conclusion by the middle of January, and if we had not canceled one of the meetings, we might even been final conclusion by the end of the year. We would like to put out an RFP in the spring for the 2020 work, which means we need to hurry up and change whatever we're going to change. Sorry, 2021. So we time's wasting. But I think with COE working away on removing the one fuel line and making whatever changes we need to make to the operations, I think we're on time where we could accommodate those changes. I don't think that we are on a timeline where we could radically change the design of the Dolphins, and I do think everyone understands that now and is sort of looking forward to whatever comes next.
Thank you.
No other questions then? The question that I have been chewing on is we have the value engineering group, which were stakeholders related to the petroleum and cement terminal. And as we move forward into the next elements and looking at the big picture, I kind of have a homework assignment for you too. Should you choose to accept this assignment, is to identify who or what qualities, backgrounds would be best constituting a working group that would be moving into the next phase of this conversation. If it's the same people, great, but if it's a different set of people, it would be nice to begin that conversation so that we can change the mandate so you know where we're looking, where you're looking is all the same place. And so I'm hopeful that we can have that conversation in the next month.
That seems like an appropriate time. And I'll say from where we sit, I mean, without any assembly instruction, we have a couple things. We, in working with the user group, have all assessed the need to have a kind of common roadmap for how the rest of the project plays out. we have taken a first draft of that. We're gonna have a presentation with Toby Mattson, to sort of give them our preliminary ideas, get their preliminary ideas next week. And the notion is that eventually we all kind of get on the same page. Here's how we want the order of operations to go going forward. I am gonna make the pitch that we do whatever we can to not repeat this exercise, so that we do all of this before we get to the final contract, the final 100% design and letting the contract, so there isn't this after the fact trying to catch up to it. And that we bring more of the critical choices to you earlier, because one of the things that happened in this process was there was 2013 SHREP, 2014 SHREP, then we went off and designed it, we sent all the plans, people kind of sort of paid attention, then we said, we're done, we did it, and we're ready to buy it, and then people woke up. I don't want that to happen again, and I don't think it's going to happen again because the users are much more engaged. But I also think in that process, we want to shoot flares up to say, at various milestones, here are the design decisions that we have made, and bring them to you guys in some form. We might just be an informational memorandum or something, but that so the whole community sees this is the path we're on, and there isn't a surprise at the end. I think that would be well received by the news group too, because they are also interested in making sure that we don't end up in this posture again, which I don't think is ideal from anybody's perspective.
Yeah, what I would suggest is, instead of thinking of it as a post hoc value engineering group, a small group that is composed of members of the administration and the board, separate from the users, they can convene and through them talk through their members, you guys, all of us. So I think that's the idea going forward that would be very helpful, is to make sure you have a small team that is working closely with a small team from them. So
What will we do without that kind of insight? Thank you so much.
Hey, I have been requested to put that on the record by the users because they're afraid that a lot of this is just show. Not some of them, I should say, not a lot of them, but some of them are afraid that it's just show, that we will find ourselves back in a position where the pinion point is over and the ship is going to continue moving forward in the direction it was previously set. And so they have asked for that. I asked them to put it in writing, and they did not put it in writing. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been my words, it would have been their words.
So it's indicative that they haven't put it in writing.
Yes. But that being said, it's the same. Let us figure out who the constituents are for that group so we can kind of take the next step, which is point through that process who the right people are. Ms. Elton, Mr. Dice.
Thank you. Those flares that you're shooting up to get everyone's attention as they resolve, or those issues resolve, I would love for that to be part of the conversation as the tariff continues to be reviewed, so that we can maybe plan ahead as we kind of start to put the project in a ballpark of funds, so it's not all, we've now committed to how many of our $100 million design, and now we're going to figure out how we're going to pay for it to the extent we can be out in front of it, would be my preference, or at least have it be part of the conversation.
Before you go, Will, I just want to, for the record, say that troublemaker previously speaking was the mayor. Anyhow, go ahead, Mr. Paul.
I agree with that. I think we are acutely aware of the fact now that what we're designing in the main, we are probably going to have to pay for it ourselves. Hopefully we'll have the same level of success that we've had in state grants and federal grants, but we don't know until we know. And we are very cost-consciously looking to redesign the cargo terminals. The tariff conversation also raises another point, which is that at some point in 2020, I do think that as the cargo effort ramps up and becomes serious, the idea of coming back to you for a 20-foot equivalent unit box surcharge in some amount will probably happen. And that is because even before we're really incurring hundreds of millions of dollars of construction costs, there is a design effort, and that will take several years. Even the most modest of the TEU charges, $10 a box, which changes the price of milk by a penny, that would give us more than enough to get through all of that and to begin the Roaster Drewski suggestion of kind of squirreling away some money to prepare for the fact that we are going to need tremendous amounts.
So, since we veered into that topic, the tariff, there is an amendment coming forward that suggests the annual review from the Port Commission. Ms. Alatel has asked that we also add a phrase in there along the lines of that we continue analyzing how we put funds into a broader category so that we can have the money to do these projects when they come up. And so know that is part of the conversation that's still happening. And I understand that we have a tariff cargo tariff conversation that would be scheduled for 2020, is that correct? Already, is it kind of, no?
No, I mean, in the absence of someone making and taking initiative and bringing it forward, if we adopt that 10-year tariff, we could just leave that in place for 10 years. There's nothing that brings any of it back until a decade. But like I say, as we talked about last time, we fully intend to come back to you and true things up as they can be trued up, and I suspect that we will have some kind of TE surcharge proposal for you in early 2020. But we got to talk to the Matsons and the others.
They're definitely listening. Mr. Slivka.
So I did want to preview what you will see next after your tariff conversation on Tuesday. We're going to bring forth in early January for discussion the port plan of finance, where we're actually going to ask for authority to borrow the money needed to do the 2021 work. That will be in the nature of $100 million, $60 million toward what has been called the design work that we believe is left for the PCT, $40 million for the existing line of credit that we have outstanding at the port, which we will have to pay off before we borrow any additional money. This is not going to commit us to do anything. It's just going to give us the ability to issue the RFP in 2020 for the 2021 work, and you are going to see that in January.
I'm sure that'll all be in writing.
Yes.
Next month. We'll get to that when it's time. Okay, I'm going to quickly turn 2 minutes for public comment, public participation. No, there is none. Then with that, I say thank you for everyone. Mr. Dyson, go ahead.
Yeah. So Mr. Sturgielewski, when he was talking to us, talked about, in essence, being able to do fuel from several different places. The hatch with the fuel manifolds down below it, some kind of a crane to keep the tensions on the line and stuff. I think he was talking about us, in essence, not doing a petroleum dock, but having those kind of capacities in the other docks. But is it correct to infer from what you showed and so on that other ports have done those kind of flexible fueling stations?
Yes, we know of 2 other ports in Alaska that have fuel vaults. I don't know about the number of other ports around the world that have fuel capabilities on cargo terminals with movable cranes, but at least the way the conversation had moved recently was the better answer probably is to combine some fuel capabilities at the cargo terminal. The fuel vaults are probably not the right way to do it, but there should be a right way to do it. So I think all parties are looking to figure out how to eliminate that component terminal.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? With that, we're going to be adjourned and move on.